Emily stepped out of the taxi, the warm Lagos sun touching her face as she pulled her woven carry-on from the back seat. The airport was buzzing with travelers rushing in every direction, but she walked at her own steady pace. Her ticket was already booked and paid for weeks ago, so there was no reason to panic. She had dressed simply but beautifully, in a bright Ankara dress that carried the scent of the morning breeze. As she wheeled her bag toward the terminal doors, she could feel the mix of excitement and peace that always came with traveling. She wasn't expecting anything unusual, just a smooth check-in and a quiet wait for her flight. But the moment she reached the check-in counter, she sensed something shifting. The man in front of her turned slightly, his eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that felt more like judgment than curiosity. She didn't know him, yet there was a sharpness in his stare, like he had already decided who she was. The soft hum of the airport seemed to fade, replaced by a tension she couldn't quite name. She had no idea that this short stop at the counter would turn into something unforgettable. Emily had barely settled into her spot in the queue when a tall man in a bright, flashy suit stepped in beside her. The suit was the kind that shouted for attention, deep purple with gold pinstripes, paired with shiny crocodile shoes. His cologne hit the air before his voice did, heavy and overpowering. At first, she thought he was just another impatient traveler trying to find his place in line, but then he leaned slightly toward her, his eyes sweeping over her Ankara dress with an expression that made her stomach tighten. "People like you should be in the economy line," he said, loud enough for the two women behind them to hear. The words were coated with arrogance, and the way his mouth curled after speaking them told her he meant every syllable. Emily froze for a second. She knew "people like you" wasn't about anything specific, at least not to him. It was a lazy way of saying he had already decided she didn't belong here. He looked at her dress like it was a ticket to a lower class, like her place in the world was something he could guess from the fabric she wore. She felt eyes turning toward them. A man in a leather jacket glanced over. The two women behind them whispered. Somewhere in the corner, a child giggled without knowing why. Duro didn't stop there. "First class is for people who actually belong here," he added, his tone sharper now. He shifted his weight, his gold wristwatch catching the light as if it was part of the statement. Emily's instinct told her to fire back, to let him know exactly who he was talking to. But something in her, something stronger than anger, told her to wait. She kept her face calm, her lips closed and her eyes steady. She didn't need to prove herself to a stranger in a loud suit. She already knew the truth. What Duro didn't know was that every second he kept talking was only digging a hole he would soon regret standing in. Duro's voice suddenly got louder, sharp enough to cut through the hum of the airport. "Don't block the way for those who actually belong here," he announced, his words bouncing off the tiled walls as if he wanted the whole terminal to hear. It was no longer just a comment, it was a performance. He shifted his stance, squaring his shoulders like a man used to commanding attention. A few heads turned instantly. A man in a suit at the far end of the queue glanced over, frowning slightly. The two women behind Emily let out quiet, awkward chuckles, the kind people give when they don't know whether to laugh or stay silent. But to Emily, those chuckles felt like tiny shards of glass pressing into her chest. She could feel the heat creeping up her neck, not from shame but from the strange, piercing spotlight she had been dragged into. She had come to the airport for a peaceful journey, yet now she stood like an exhibit in a place where everyone thought they could judge her value by her clothes. Duro was enjoying himself. His eyes scanned the crowd, making sure they were watching, as if he was some hero protecting the dignity of the first-class line. He tilted his head at her bag, a simple woven carry-on, and let out a scoff. "Some people just don't know their place," he muttered, loud enough to keep the sting alive. Emily's hands tightened slightly on the handle of her bag, but her face didn't move. She had learned long ago that silence could be louder than anger. Her mother used to say, "Let people talk. When the truth shows up, their words will choke them." So she stood still, breathing slowly, letting him have his moment. Inside, she knew something he didn't, that this little scene he was staging would soon turn on him. And when it did, it would be in front of the same audience he was so desperate to impress. What Duro didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that Emily was not some random traveler who had accidentally wandered into the wrong line. She was a senior partner at one of Africa's most prestigious law firms, a woman whose name was known in boardrooms from Johannesburg to Nairobi. She had spent years building a career brick by brick, case by case, until she stood at the very top of her field. She wasn't just successful, she was respected. Her first-class ticket hadn't been a last-minute splurge. It was non-refundable, fully paid for months ago, and booked in her own name without anyone's help. It came with lounge access, priority boarding, and a level of comfort most travelers only dreamed about. But she didn't need to flash it around to feel important. Amelie carried her worth in her posture, in the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly who she was. Still, she wasn't ready to reveal any of this. Let him think what he wanted. Let him measure her with his narrow ruler. She had learned that sometimes the sweetest victories came when you let people underestimate you. They dug their own holes without you lifting a finger. She thought about how easy it would be to pull out her ticket right then, to silence him and the snickering behind her. But no, why waste the moment? The day still had more to unfold, and she was patient. Amelie stood there, her hands resting lightly on her bag, her eyes fixed on the counter ahead. Every second that passed was another stitch in a story Duro didn't realize he was weaving for himself. Soon enough the truth would hit him. And when it did, it would not come quietly. It would come in the kind of way that left a sting he would never forget. When Amelie finally stepped up to the counter, she did it with the same calm grace she had held from the start. The young woman at the airline desk looked up, and her face instantly lit up with recognition. "Welcome back, Miss Amelie," she said warmly, her voice carrying just enough for those nearby to hear. "It's good to see you again. We've gone ahead and upgraded your suite for this flight, complimentary of course." The words hung in the air like a spark before a fire catches. Amelie smiled politely, sliding her passport across the counter. "Thank you," she said softly, but her eyes held a quiet strength. Gasps rippled through the line. Heads tilted, whispers began, and somewhere behind her, the two women who had giggled earlier suddenly fell silent. Duro, standing only a few steps away, froze mid-smirk. His mouth opened slightly, as if searching for something to say, but nothing came out. The staff member printed her golden boarding pass and handed it over with both hands, the way one might present an award. "Your lounge access is ready, and your car will meet you on arrival," she added, still smiling. Amelie took the pass with the lightest touch, her fingers brushing the edge of the paper like it was nothing more than routine. She didn't glance at Duro, not even once. Instead, she picked up her carry-on, straightened her shoulders, and began walking toward the VIP entrance. Behind her, the line shifted uncomfortably. People were no longer looking at her with amusement but with a mix of admiration and surprise. Duro's eyes followed her, but now they carried a flicker of something new: regret. The scene had turned in an instant. Without raising her voice, without defending herself, Amelie had rewritten the story. And the best part? She hadn't even tried. Amelie didn't spare him a glance. She simply handed over her passport with the ease of someone who had done this many times before. The airline staff, still smiling warmly, placed the golden boarding pass in her hand. It gleamed under the airport lights, a quiet symbol of the world she truly belonged to. She took it without fuss, her movements slow and graceful, as if she had all the time in the world. Then, with her woven carry-on rolling smoothly behind her, she began her walk toward the VIP lounge. Her head was high, her back straight, every step carrying the kind of poise that couldn't be faked. She didn't need a crown. Her presence alone was royal. The sound of her heels clicking on the polished floor seemed to echo louder than the chatter around her. Passengers who had heard Duro's words just moments ago now shifted their eyes toward her with a different kind of attention. Some looked curious, some impressed, and a few even ashamed for believing his assumptions. Duro stood frozen, watching her move further away. The confidence in her stride made his earlier insults look small, almost childish. He had wanted to put her in her place, but now it was clear she had been in her place all along, and it was far above the one he imagined for her. Amelie didn't rush. She glided past the regular seating area, past the busy crowd, and toward the quiet glass doors of the VIP lounge. With a simple scan of her pass, the doors opened, revealing a world of soft lighting, plush chairs, and calm music. She stepped inside without looking back, leaving Duro standing in the noise and chaos he had tried to drag her into. In that walk, without saying a single word, she had given him the answer he didn't know he was looking for. And it was one he would not forget. Fate, it seemed, had a wicked sense of humor. Amelie had just settled into a deep leather chair in the VIP lounge, the soft hum of jazz floating in the air. A waitress had brought her a delicate porcelain cup filled with steaming hibiscus tea, its sweet floral scent curling upward like a gentle welcome. She crossed her legs, leaned back, and let the tension of the terminal melt away. This was her world, quiet, refined, untouched by the chaos outside. Then the glass door slid open and in walked Duro. His loud suit seemed even more out of place under the warm, muted lights of the lounge. At first he didn't see her. His eyes darted around as if he was checking whether anyone here matched his idea of belonging. Then his gaze landed on her. Emily didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She simply lifted her cup, took a slow sip and set it back down with care. Her eyes met his for the briefest moment, not with anger, but with a calm that made his posture stiffen. The lounge wasn't crowded, but somehow fate had placed him in the seat directly opposite hers. He hesitated before sitting, as though the chair might bite. The silence between them was heavy, yet Emily didn't rush to fill it. Instead, she turned slightly toward the panoramic window, watching planes taxi along the runway as if he wasn't even there. Duro shifted uncomfortably, tugging at his gold cufflinks. The air between them was no longer charged with the false confidence he had at the check-in counter. It was thick with awkwardness, the kind that makes a man realize he may have just been the fool in his own story. Emily lifted her tea again, the faint clink of porcelain on saucer breaking the silence. She didn't need words. The lounge, the tea, the quiet authority in her presence, they all spoke for her. Emily still didn't speak to Duro. She let the silence stretch, heavy and unbroken, like a lesson he would have to sit through whether he liked it or not. He shifted in his seat, glancing around as if searching for a distraction, but there was none. The lounge was calm, quiet, and unforgiving. Then, as if the universe wanted to make things even clearer, the glass doors slid open again. A tall man in a perfectly tailored navy suit walked in. His presence carried weight, the kind that made people straighten their posture without even realizing it. He spotted Emily instantly, and his face broke into a warm smile. "Ah, Emily," he said, striding toward her with the confidence of someone who knew her well. It was the Nigerian Minister of Trade, a man whose name often appeared in headlines. He leaned down to give her a brief, respectful hug. "I didn't know you were on this flight. Are you heading to the summit?" "Yes," she replied with an easy smile, her voice light but steady. "And I hear you'll be opening the first session?" They slipped into conversation effortlessly, discussing trade agreements and legal reforms as though they were sitting in a private office rather than an airport lounge. Emily laughed softly at one of his remarks, her eyes lighting up in genuine engagement. Duro sat frozen in his chair, watching this exchange like someone slowly realizing the ground under his feet wasn't as solid as he thought. He didn't dare interrupt. The man who had been so quick to speak before was now completely silent, shrinking into the background. Emily didn't even glance in his direction. She didn't need to. The balance had already shifted. Without raising her voice, without delivering a single sharp comeback, she had changed the entire dynamic. Here she was, respected and recognized by people of real influence, while he sat quietly learning what it felt like to be the one out of place. Emily was still speaking with the minister, her tone warm and confident, when her phone began to buzz on the small table beside her. She excused herself politely, picking it up without urgency. "Yes," she answered, her voice calm but focused. Duro wasn't trying to listen, but her words carried in the quiet lounge. "Tell them we'll proceed with the $12 million contract," she said, as casually as someone might approve a lunch menu. She listened for a moment, nodded and added, "Yes, have the final draft sent to my office before the week ends. Thank you." Then she ended the call, placed the phone down, and went right back to her conversation as if nothing remarkable had just been said. For her, it wasn't remarkable. It was just another day, another decision, another project moving forward. But for Duro, sitting across from her, it was like a spotlight had just revealed the truth he had been blind to. $12 million? This wasn't a woman scrambling for a seat she couldn't afford. This was a woman whose influence reached across borders, whose decisions shifted numbers that most people would never see in their lifetime. He stared at her now, really seeing her for the first time. The poise in her posture, the quiet confidence in her voice, the way she didn't need to prove anything. Her life spoke for her. Emily never looked at him, never offered an explanation. She just continued chatting with the minister, sipping her hibiscus tea, her laughter soft but full of certainty. Duro leaned back in his chair, the reality settling on him like a heavy coat. He had tried to measure her worth in fabric and luggage, but her world was built on power, respect, and influence that no flashy suit could buy. And now he couldn't unsee it. When the boarding announcement came over the speakers, Emily rose from her seat with unhurried grace. She thanked the minister for the conversation, picked up her woven carry-on, and strolled toward the gate. The glass doors to the lounge slid open for her, and the soft murmur of the lounge faded into the busier sounds of the terminal. At the gate, a flight attendant looked up, her face lighting instantly. "Good evening, Miss Emily," she said warmly, as if greeting an old friend. "We've been expecting you." Without asking for her pass, the attendant gently took her carry-on and gestured toward the jet bridge. As Emily stepped onto the plane, another attendant was already waiting. "Your suite is ready," she said with a polite smile, guiding her to a spacious private area that felt more like a luxury hotel room than an airplane seat. Plush leather, a wide bed, soft lighting. It was the kind of comfort most travelers only saw in glossy magazine photos. A chilled glass of champagne was placed in her hand before she even sat down. Emily smiled, thanked them, and sank into her seat, the golden boarding pass tucked neatly into her purse. She crossed her legs, letting the calm settle around her. A few minutes later, Duro entered the plane. His suit didn't seem quite as loud under the softer cabin lights. His eyes flicked toward her suite for just a second before quickly darting away. There was no mistaking it. He had seen her, and the reality stung. The attendant led him past her, further down the aisle, to a much smaller business class seat. He tried to mask his discomfort, but the difference between their worlds was now impossible to ignore. Emily didn't even turn her head. She didn't need to. She simply lifted her champagne, took a slow sip, and let the truth speak for itself. Hours passed as the plane cruised smoothly through the night sky. Duro sat alone in his cramped business class seat, the hum of the engines filling the quiet cabin. But inside his mind a storm was raging. He couldn't stop thinking about that moment back at the airport, the moment when he had judged Emily just by the way she looked. He replayed his harsh words over and over, the sneer on his face, the way he had told her she didn't belong. Now, trapped in his own thoughts in the dim light of the cabin, it all felt like a mistake he couldn't take back. Duro realized that he had been blind, letting his pride and assumptions cloud his judgment. Emily's simple Ankara dress, her quiet confidence, her calm smile. He had dismissed it all without knowing who she really was. She wasn't just another traveler trying to sneak into a better class. She was a powerful woman, someone whose influence reached far beyond what he could imagine. He thought about her walk down the aisle, head held high, grace in every step. He remembered the way the flight attendants treated her like royalty, offering champagne and guiding her to her private suite. And then there was his own seat, a sharp contrast, small and tight, a reminder of how far below her he truly was. For the first time, Duro felt the sting of regret, not just for his words, but for the way he had let his ego blind him to the truth. He wondered how many other people he had judged unfairly in his life, how many moments he had missed because of his pride. As the night wore on, the plane carrying them both toward the same destination, Duro's mind was quiet but heavy. He knew one thing for sure. He would never see Emily the same way again. She had flown higher than him in every way that mattered, and that truth was impossible to ignore. About halfway through the flight, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The sudden bumps and shakes sent passengers gripping their seats, some gasping softly. The flight attendants quickly reminded everyone to stay seated, but the lounge area wasn't as secure. Passengers who had been relaxing there were gently guided back to their seats. Duro found himself standing awkwardly near the lounge entrance, looking uneasy. He spotted Emily sitting calmly in her private suite nearby. His heart pounded, and he knew he couldn't just walk away without saying something. Gathering his courage, he approached her carefully, his voice low and hesitant. "Emily," he began, his tone unsteady. I want to apologize for what I said earlier. I was wrong, and I didn't mean to disrespect you." Emily looked up, her expression calm but unreadable. She listened quietly, nodding slowly, but there was no warmth in her eyes. She wasn't the kind of person to forgive so easily, especially not after public humiliation. "I appreciate your words," she said gently but firmly. But respect isn't given because of an apology. It's earned, and actions speak louder than words. Duro swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his mistake heavier than ever. He wanted to explain, to make excuses, but the truth was clear. His pride had blinded him. Emily didn't push him for more. She stayed composed, her posture relaxed but strong. The turbulence outside seemed to mirror the tension between them inside the cabin. For a moment they sat in silence, two very different people brought together by chance and circumstance. Duro realized that this conversation wasn't just about the airport incident anymore, it was about humility, growth, and maybe, just maybe, a chance to start over. But for now, Emily kept her distance, reminding him quietly that respect isn't a gift, it's something you have to earn. When the plane finally touched down, the passengers began gathering their belongings, preparing to leave. But Emily's arrival was different. As she stepped off the aircraft, a group of photographers was already waiting near the gate. Their cameras clicked and flashed, capturing every moment as if she were a star on the red carpet. It wasn't surprising to those who knew her. Emily was heading to a high-profile legal summit, invited as a keynote speaker because of her impressive work and reputation. The press knew her name well, and today they were eager to catch a glimpse of the woman who had quietly become one of Africa's most powerful voices in law and justice. Duro followed behind, his eyes darting nervously toward Emily. She walked confidently, her head held high, not once glancing back at him. She didn't need to. The cameras and the crowd gave her the recognition she deserved. As flashes popped and reporters whispered, Emily moved with calm determination. The crowd parted for her, and people who had only just heard her name felt the weight of her presence. There was no anger in her steps, no bitterness from what had happened earlier, just strength and grace. Duro felt the sting again, realizing that while he had tried to humiliate her, the world was already applauding her. He was just a man left behind in the shadows of someone who had soared far beyond his reach. Emily didn't slow down. She passed him by, silent and unshaken, moving forward into a future she had built with her own hands. The cameras kept flashing, capturing the moment when a woman who had been underestimated walked through the gate, not just as a traveler, but as a queen in her own right. By the time the sun rose over Lagos the next morning, the airport incident had already exploded across social media. A video, captured by a bystander, showed the tense moment when Duro had spoken down to Emily, and the powerful way she had handled it. The caption read simply, "When you think she's ordinary but she's extraordinary." The video spread like wildfire. Within hours, thousands of people had watched, shared, and commented. Many praised Emily's calm and dignity in the face of humiliation. "She didn't yell or fight back," one comment said. "She showed real strength by staying silent and letting her actions speak." Others pointed out the harsh reality of judging people by their looks or clothes, reminding everyone that true worth can't be seen at first glance. "This is a lesson for all of us," wrote another user. "Don't judge a book by its cover." News outlets picked up the story too, celebrating Emily as a symbol of grace and power. Some called her a role model for young women across Africa, showing that success comes from confidence, hard work, and patience. The buzz wasn't just online. People in markets, offices, and schools were talking about Emily's story. Some shared their own experiences of being judged unfairly, inspired by the way she handled herself. For Emily, the attention was unexpected but didn't change her. She kept moving forward, focused on her work and the summit ahead. But deep down she felt proud, not because of the fame, but because her quiet strength had touched so many hearts. That morning, the world saw more than a woman in an Ankara dress at an airport. They saw a woman who refused to be defined by someone else's opinion. And that made all the difference. Duro carried the memory of Emily with him long after the plane had landed. That moment at the airport, the way he had tried to humiliate her, the way he had judged her by her clothes, played over and over in his mind. But what stayed with him most was the truth he couldn't escape. She flew higher than he ever imagined, not just on the plane but in life. He saw it clearly now. Emily wasn't defined by the loud suit he wore or the seat he occupied. She moved through the world with a quiet power, one that didn't need to shout or prove itself. She had won without anger, without revenge, just by being herself. For Emily, the journey didn't end at the airport. She didn't just arrive in another city. She stepped into a room full of people who respected her, listened to her, and needed her voice. Her victory wasn't in words spoken or battles fought. It was in her grace, her patience, and the strength she carried without trying to show it. Duro thought about the lesson she had unknowingly taught him. It was simple but hard to learn. Never judge someone by what you see on the surface. Sometimes the people who seem ordinary carry the greatest power inside. He wondered if he would ever get a chance to apologize properly, or if the lesson was meant to stay with him as a quiet reminder. Either way, he knew he would never forget Amelie, the woman who rose above, who refused to be put down, and who won without saying a single word. And somewhere in a far-off city, Amelie was moving forward, unaware of the lasting mark she had left on a man who had once tried to tear her down. Her story wasn't just about a ticket or a suit. It was about dignity, strength, and the quiet power of flying higher than anyone expects.